Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and thank you for joining us today. The situation between Russia and Belarus is heating up in a way that has taken many by surprise. What was once considered an unshakable alliance between Vladimir Putin and Alexander Lukashenko now shows cracks that are becoming more visible with every passing week. Lukashenko, often seen as Putin's closest ally in Europe, is sending signals that he will not simply be a puppet for Moscow's agenda. This development is not just about two leaders, it's about the future of Eastern Europe, NATO's response, and the balance of power across the entire region. For years, Lukashenko has relied on Moscow for political and economic support, especially during moments when the West has isolated Belarus over human rights issues and disputed elections. But Lukashenko is also known for being a master of survival politics. He has played a delicate game of balancing Russian influence with a desire to maintain his country's sovereignty. Now, with Russia deeply involved in its war in Ukraine and under heavy Western sanctions, Lukashenko sees an opportunity to remind Putin that Belarus is not just a satellite state, but an independent actor with its own interests. His latest statements, which carry a warning tone, seem designed to draw a red line for Moscow. Putin is reportedly furious because Belarus has hinted that it might limit its involvement in Russia's military operations. This is a sensitive issue for the Kremlin. Belarus has already allowed Russian troops to use its territory as a staging ground for operations in Ukraine, and its cooperation is crucial for Russia's strategic depth. However, Lukashenko appears to be signaling that there is a limit to how far he is willing to go. He has publicly stated that Belarus will not be dragged into a full-scale war with Ukraine and that its own security priorities come first. For Putin, who expects loyalty from his closest allies, this kind of rhetoric is not just irritating, it is alarming. The timing of Lukashenko's remarks is particularly significant. Russia's military campaign in Ukraine is facing immense pressure, with Ukrainian forces continuing to resist and Western nations pouring in weapons, intelligence, and financial aid. In this context, losing Belarus's full cooperation would be a major setback for the Kremlin. It could also embolden other Russian partners or neighbors who have been quietly uneasy about Moscow's actions. This is why Putin's reaction reportedly has been one of anger and frustration. The Russian president views Lukashenko's words as a challenge to his authority at a time when he can least afford internal dissent. Observers say Lukashenko's strategy is partly aimed at reminding the West that Belarus is still open to dialogue. In recent months, there have been subtle signals from Minsk suggesting that Lukashenko might be interested in reducing tensions with Europe if certain conditions are met. This does not mean he is abandoning Russia, but it does mean he is trying to keep his options open. By pushing back against Moscow's demands in a very public way, Lukashenko is telling both Putin and Western capitals that he is no mere subordinate. He is also buying himself leverage for future negotiations, whether over energy supplies, sanctions relief, or security guarantees. Another factor driving Lukashenko's behavior is domestic politics. Belarus has experienced years of unrest following the disputed 2020 presidential election, which many believe was rigged in Lukashenko's favor. The protests that followed were some of the largest in the country's history, and while they were eventually crushed, discontent remains simmering beneath the surface. Lukashenko knows that openly committing Belarusian troops to fight in Ukraine would be deeply unpopular at home and could reignite protests. By publicly pushing back against Russia's pressure, he is presenting himself as a defender of Belarusian sovereignty, hoping to rally nationalist sentiment and prevent new waves of dissent. Putin, meanwhile, cannot simply ignore this challenge. His image as a strong leader who commands loyalty from allies is a cornerstone of his domestic narrative. If Lukashenko is seen as defying him without consequence, it could inspire other leaders, perhaps in Central Asia or even within Russia's own elite, to question Moscow's decisions more openly. Therefore, the Kremlin is likely weighing its response very carefully. Direct confrontation with Lukashenko could risk destabilizing Belarus, something Moscow wants to avoid at all costs. At the same time, Putin may try to use economic tools, energy pricing, or covert political pressure to remind Lukashenko of his dependence on Russia. This developing situation is also being closely monitored by NATO. Belarus shares a long border with Ukraine, Poland, and the Baltic states. Any rift between Minsk and Moscow could have major implications for regional security. If Lukashenko distances himself from Russia even slightly, it might open the door to new diplomatic efforts by the West to pull Belarus out of Moscow's orbit. This would be a major strategic blow to Putin, as Belarus has been a critical buffer state for Russia. NATO officials are likely watching for any signs that Belarus might reduce its cooperation with Russian military operations, as this could change the dynamics of the war in Ukraine. Lukashenko's warning is not just a symbolic gesture. It also comes with practical steps, such as limiting the movement of Russian forces or demanding more control over what Russian troops do on Belarusian soil. If these measures are enforced, they could complicate Russia's military logistics and planning. Already, there are reports of friction between Belarusian and Russian commanders over the use of local bases and infrastructure. Such disagreements could slow down Russian operations and force Moscow to divert resources to smooth relations with its only remaining European ally. Despite the tension, both sides still need each other. Belarus's economy is deeply tied to Russia's, and Lukashenko knows that breaking with Moscow entirely could be disastrous. Russia provides cheap energy, access to markets, and crucial security guarantees that Lukashenko cannot get from the West. Similarly, Putin knows that losing Belarus would mean losing a vital geopolitical partner and a key piece of Russia's defensive architecture. For now, this relationship remains one of mutual dependence, but it is a dependence that is being tested like never before. As we look ahead, the big question is whether this public warning from Lukashenko will lead to real change or simply fade away as a temporary political maneuver. Some analysts believe that Lukashenko will ultimately back down, as he has done in the past when confronted with Russian pressure. Others think that this could be the start of a gradual but irreversible shift in Belarus's foreign policy, especially if the war in Ukraine continues to drag on and Russia's position weakens. Either way, this episode is a reminder that even Russia's closest allies are not immune to doubts about Moscow's strategy. It is also worth noting that Lukashenko's words will be heard not just in Moscow and Brussels, but also in Kiev. Ukraine has long worried that Belarus could be used as a second front in the war, forcing Ukrainian forces to spread thin and defend their northern border. If Belarus truly limits Russia's ability to operate from its territory, this would be a relief for Kiev and could free up Ukrainian forces to focus more on their eastern and southern fronts. However, Ukraine will remain cautious, as Lukashenko's track record shows that he can change his position very quickly depending on circumstances. The coming months will be crucial in determining where this relationship goes. If Lukashenko continues to speak out and back up his words with action, we could see a slow but real shift away from total alignment with Moscow. If he is brought back into line by Russian pressure, then this episode might simply be remembered as another example of Lukashenko's political maneuvering. Either way, The tension between Putin and Lukashenko is a story worth following because it touches on everything from the war in Ukraine to NATO's Eastern strategy and the future of Russian influence in Europe. For now, one thing is clear. The alliance between Putin and Lukashenko is not as ironclad as it once appeared. The warning from Minsk has sent a clear message: Belarus will not blindly follow Moscow's orders if doing so threatens its own stability. Whether this leads to a major geopolitical shift or just a temporary storm remains to be seen, but it shows that the war in Ukraine is reshaping alliances in ways that even the Kremlin might not have anticipated.